We're very excited to have you both here. I know you know each other very well. Hugo is the founder of One Small Step, former Ireland... Sorry, did I say Hugo? Yeah. Thank you for catching me out on that one. Trevor? I won't get you mixed up again, I promise. Okay. Sorry. Trevor is the founder of One Small Step. He's the former Ireland and British and Irish Lions rugby player. As rugby was an amateur sport in your time, Ringland was also a full-time solicitor, so you had to work to pay your sport, yeah? In 2006, he was appointed as a member of the new Northern Ireland Policing Board. He's been a director of Independent News and Media, Mediation Northern Ireland and the Ireland Funds. I also noted that you were the president of the Irish Universities Rugby Union and a really strong and passionate advocate for the development of young people, their education and their careers through sport. You are also an active with the Peace Players International, an organisation devoted to promote interreligious unity in Belfast through sport. And in 2009, Trevor was awarded an MBE for services to the community in Northern Ireland. So please welcome Trevor. And Hugo, I definitely know your name. Hugo is an ambassador at the Trinity Centre for People with Intellectual Disabilities and chairman of British-Irish Association. Former Irish and British and Irish Lions Rugby Union International, Hugo was a rugby union player who played for Ireland, Leinster, the French Barbarians and the British and Irish Lions during the 1980s. During the late 1970s, you also played soccer for UCD and was the top scorer in the 78-79 season, but he also played soccer for Trinity and was on the 79 Collingwood, that's the InterVarsities Cup winning team, and you scored the 2 goals that won, the only goals of that match, so well done. And after retiring from sport, Hugo went on to serve as a director for Goldman Sachs, and you've worked as a rugby pundit for TV3, BBC Radio 5 Live. Hugo is also a great supporter and friend to Trinity Sport. And a scoop for all of you special people in here, he's going to be announced as a Trinity Sport Ambassador next week. So thank you. Please welcome Hugo. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you both the same question and give you a chance to answer. And then we'll move through a few questions. And hopefully, if anybody has a question in the audience, we'll give you some time for that as well. So the same question that I asked Amina, Hugo, would you mind going first? Through your experience, how has sport created relationships through different communities and cultures?
Well, I think there's 2 sort of great examples, and you talked earlier about Nelson Mandela and the image going around the world. When I was in Trinity at the end of my first season playing for Ireland, Ireland decided to go on tour to South Africa, and it was at the time when the apartheid regime was still on, and it was very divisive for the country. It divided the country, and Kader Asmal, who was a professor here, was the head of the Irish anti-apartheid movement. And in the end, I decided not to go, and because there was a lot of the black leaders in South Africa were saying, don't come. South Africa, don't worry about, they can't borrow on the international markets or do stuff, but they really care about playing rugby. So I decided not to go, and it was interesting. The next year I went to Oxford and met a lot of South Africans there, and I wondered what their reaction would be, because they were quite liberal South Africans. And to one and all, they kind of said, don't come back and see us, but not playing rugby. But the great sort of follow-on, to that was that sort of when you talked about the World Cup final, that France, when South Africa came back into the World Game, and they played the final. They got to the final. It was in South Africa. They were playing New Zealand. Nobody gave them a chance. And we got to know Francois Pienaar, and we'll come back to who was the captain of the team. He said he was in the dressing room beforehand, and they were about to go out to play the mighty All Blacks. And there was a knock on the door, and the president of the South African Rugby Union said, it's the president, Mandela, he wants to see. He said, oh God, the captain said, we're about to go out in the field, we're going to play the All Blacks, but it's the president. And they said, of course, that he came in. Now, what they didn't know And what he did was he came in wearing a Springbok rugby jersey and a Springbok cap. And that had been the symbol of that had been the symbol of sort of oppression. And we got to know Francois through something, Peace International we did, which we'll talk about. Francois said, when the president came in the Springbok, the South African jersey, he said, we just all stopped and looked at him. And nobody said anything. But he said there was no way we were going to lose that match that day. And so, what was my point? The point is, after having seen the negative impact on South African sport and the poisonous impact that it had, really on the relations with the rest of the world, it was so fantastic to see that image of the new South Africa with President Mandela. And I know there's been problems since, but that was a sort of a huge step. And that was when, just one of the most extraordinary moments, in sport.
Absolutely unbelievable. Trevor, for you, the same question, through your experience, how has sport created relationships through different communities and cultures?
I think it's just been a privilege to be involved in sport. I've loved sport throughout my life. My grandfather was involved in sport. My father was involved in sport. He played hockey, but he played hockey like a rugby player, as I understand it. But I think, as Armina said, sorry, I'll leave that there. Sport sort of reflects society, and she was talking about her experience at her university, that they're always talking about the negative, and that's one thing you can do with sport. There's plenty that's negative there that you can bring out. But the thing about sport is that generally it can deal with the negative and finds ways to actually challenge the negative. And I think, to me, that's the thing about sport. I think most people who really are involved in sport and love sport, they recognize that anybody else involved in their game or their particular sport, they want to enjoy. They want them to enjoy it. They want the young people who are working with them, that they want those young people to develop as individuals, and they want them to develop as sports people. They care about them and how they do. It teaches you so many things about life, about how to compete without destroying a relationship, how to hate without actually hating. And it teaches you that sometimes it's okay to compete, and at other times you work together for your mutual benefit. And I think I told a story earlier about playing with a friend at Queen's University where I played my rugby, and the two of us played together at Queen's. We then left Queen's. He went to Estonians Rugby Club, I went to Ballymena. And we played against each other. It was the most physical of confrontations. And we literally tore lumps out of each other. And in one match, I remember that the referee pulled the two of us together at half-time and said, Davy, this guy was called Davy Irwin, and he said, Davy, Trevor, he says, could you cut it out? And the two of us at the same time looked at the referee and said, could you stay out of this? And the benefit of that was that afterwards, the two of us were in the bar, having a laugh together, having a drink together, and Davy's also my doctor. And he said, Trevor, you need a stitch in that, even though he had given it to me. And he says, I'll put it in it for you later. But the following week, we found ourselves in an Ulster team playing against the other 3 provinces in Ireland. And then that year, we found ourselves with those other provincial players playing on an Irish team as we took on the other countries in the 5 nations as it was at that time. And then we found ourselves in the British and Irish Lions team playing against the Southern Hemisphere. And there's just so many things that can flow out of sport. Concept of teamwork, concept of interdependence, which is in any successful society. There's just so many things. And just the one point I would make is with South Africa and the problems that were in South Africa and apartheid and the way it was used to pull the country together, it was already doing that in Ireland during the 70s and the 80s when this society was tearing itself apart. Rugby was actually showing a different way to do relationships on this island. It was showing a way to be inclusive, a Britishness that was also Irish and an Irishness that was British. It was pulling the people across the island together and showing that things can be different and relationships can be done in a different way. So
yeah, I think that was the big thing. Back in the 1980s and 70s when we were playing, Northern Ireland, thankfully, was in a really, was in a terrible place. I mean, violence. 3,500 people were killed in a tiny sort of area. And you must imagine what that does to fabrics of relationships. And people used to say the great thing about Irish rugby is you all play together, and you don't talk about the situation. Meaning the guys from the south, we never talk about it to the guys from the north. And when I started playing in the Irish team, that was what was kind of thought. And we kind of thought, well, that's kind of fine as far as it goes. But if you get to know somebody, and the incredible thing about sport, you get to depend on them in the intense atmosphere in international rugby or any sport, and you can't sit down with them and say, let me understand. And that's what I did with Trevor. And, we used to play together. I come from the south, he came from the north. And the rugby brought us up north. And so we talked about the situation. And I got to understand the kind of unionist position. I got to understand the sort of what were important to another tradition in the unique atmosphere of sport. And it was fantastic. Whereas, because if it hadn't been the rugby, I wouldn't have gone up north, and people come down. And people who go to school here learn the history about Ireland and its journey to be an independent country. Independent meant not British. So for somebody as getting to know Trevor and my Ulster teammates, who were Ulster, who were Irish, who were also British, and in a vaguer sense European, was a great privilege. And there was a documentary recently you mightn't have seen called Shoulder to Shoulder, where Brian O'Driscoll, maybe one of our greatest players, was a captain of Ireland, and he was talking to Rory Best, who's the current captain. Rory's from Northern Ireland, and Brian says to him, Rory, hang on, I don't get this. You're Irish and you play for Ireland, and you're British and you play, but you're British as well. I don't get that. He said, yeah, that's exactly the point. And that's actually a huge thing in this island at this point in time, when you've got loads of people calling for a united Ireland. And the first thing I say is, okay, what elements of Britishness are you going to put into this? But it's the point that Trevor made that's so important, is mutual understanding and respect. And that's actually the greatest thing that we got from sport. And the sequel, and because I got to know him and trust him so much, when the IRA blew up, started bombing Canary Wharf in London in 1996, a year after those images with President Mandela and Francois Pienaar had gone around the world, we said, hey, can we organize a peace international? Let's get the people were marching here, protesting, this is not in our name. So we had the idea of, can we bring the best rugby players in the world to Ireland as a statement of anti-IRA and loyalist violence? And it was incredible. So that for that to have it to work, we needed to get one of the big South Africans, the big names. And when somebody called us, Johnny Robbie, a former captain of Trinity, was working in South Africa, and we called him. He said, I've just spoken to Francois Pienaar, whose image with President Mandela had gone around the world. He's in, and he doesn't want a penny. And the whole thing took off. And we got a lot of the best players in the world who all came, filled Lansdowne Road. The guests of honor were not politicians, but were children whose lives had been affected directly by the Troubles. A little boy, Darren Baird, whose both his parents and his sister were killed in the Shankill Road bombing. A little boy called Tommy Mullen, whose brother was killed in a reprisal attack the next weekend when the Loyalists just went in and opened up on a pub bar. And a little boy called Gareth Bolesworth, whose best friend was killed in the Warrington bombing. And Trevor always talks rightly about the consequences of not getting relationships. There's no more stark consequence as we stood with those children whose lives had been torn apart. And at the end of the match, which had been put together in a short space of time, these great players who'd won World Cups they did a lap of honor. And the whole stadium just rose to thank them for lending their names and credibility to these players who created some of the greatest images in rugby history. And now they were lending their name to this. And we had some great days in Lansdowne Road, but I can still feel the pride as they went around and everybody sort of rose. And that's when sport can be extraordinary. And we're just privileged. And, we've been involved in North-South stuff, ever since. And it's because I've seen I've seen the best of Ulster unionism. I've seen the best of all sides of Northern Ireland. So when someone says something disparaging, I say, well, that's not actually true. That's not the full picture. And I think that's the great ability of sport to, create relationships as well as creating great sporting moments.
Thank you, Hugo. It's phenomenal stuff, really powerful stuff. Just to get a bit more into that, because you're obviously involved in one small step Trevor. Would you tell us a bit about that and what that's doing within the communities in Northern Ireland?
Well, one small step is, and I actually think it's quite key at this moment in time, in where we're going to head as an island, and I think we're at a bit of a sliding doors moment. And the key thing is that we have to up our game to keep the sporting analogies going. That we have to make sure that we go in one particular direction rather than go in the more negative direction, where some might want to take us. And so it's for us to try and make sure that that happens, because throughout those most difficult times, there were continually people showing a different way. So there was rugby. There was people who were continuing to build relationships while others were destroying them, seeking to include when others were excluding. And the concept of one small step came when the Assembly in Northern Ireland broke down way back in about 2002, 2003. And civic society said we need to do something. And so they asked me to help chair it. And I had a co-chair, Roisin McDonough, and we had a mix of people who were representatives from business, community, education, sports, and other organisations. But it was worked under 3 principles, and those 3 principles I think are still very good. And the first is that you highlight a lot of the good things that are going on in society, because it's too easy to focus on the negative. So you will hear negative stories about Northern Ireland on a regular basis. What you don't hear are the many, very many good stories that are going on about people who are countering the extremes. And it's one of the reasons why we didn't get into a civil war. We should have had a civil war in this island in the 70s and 80s, and we avoided it. And rugby and others were one of the reasons why we didn't do it. And when I talk about a civil war, I mean look at Syria, look at Bosnia. That's what a civil war is like. We had something that never quite got there for a variety of reasons. The other aspect about one small step is it's about saying to everybody, you can do something. No matter who you are, you can do something to build a relationship or break down a barrier. And if everybody does something, then all that together collectively adds up to quite a lot and has an impact. And the third is quite an important part of it, which is we also challenge our leaders and say you can't continue to use the language of extremism or alienation or exclusion. You can't continue to behave in a way that promotes violence or promotes hatred and expect to have a stable society. And we've got now a young One Small Step campaign going in Northern Ireland. And I think in the future, what we need on this island from civic society is we need a Northern Ireland for All group and an Ireland for All group, and they aren't mutually exclusive. There'll be people crossing those things to say, how do we bring out the best in our society right across this island? And in addition to that, we need to see a politics that actually starts taking some of the stuff that's done to build relationships and help reconcile people, politicians that actually take it seriously and give it the sort of support it needs. Because one of the other organisations involved is Peace Players. We work in Northern Ireland, and as I say, we constantly show what can be done. That kids from the worst, most difficult areas, most divided areas in Northern Ireland can be brought together to play sport together. And we do it in Cyprus, and we do it in Israel, and we do it in South Africa, and we do it now in US cities. It's an American organisation. But I'm constantly saying to them on the international board that we have, it's great what we do, but we really are a sticking plaster. Because we show how to deal with the symptoms, but what we don't do is deal with the causes. But to deal with the causes, we need that civic society voice, and we need that political voice to support the work. Because everywhere we operate, we show that you can bring kids together in Cyprus, and Cyprus did divide properly in a way that Ireland didn't do. But there's a lack of political and civic support for that. And to really make an impact, that's what we have to do in the future. And so that's really a challenge out there that we have to maybe take on board. And you know, Michelle, what you can do with young people, giving them proper leadership, giving them proper input. You know, our young people are incredible.
Now, I have to say, there was a time when I didn't always show that One Small Step campaign. We were playing against Scotland in 1988, I think, and I had been dropped, and I was a sub. And so Trevor was on the field, and actually he got injured, and he was brought off. And as he was brought back in the back, unfortunately he wasn't seriously injured, but he was in the ambulance, and it was kind of going off to the hospital. And suddenly there was a sort of, I went on as a substitute, and suddenly got a pass from about here to the top of the steps. And so all I had to do was catch the ball and jump over and dive over. And of course there was a huge kind of roar from the crowd as Ireland had scored a try. And so Trevor says to his wife in the back of the ambulance, the one thing I hope is that MacNeill has not scored in my position. So I think there was a sort of very just showing that.
I'd just say it was the softest try ever. His granny could have scored it.
My granny could actually have scored it at the time, but that wasn't the point. So it's important to live out those principles even when it's tough.
You're hilarious. But look, I know what you're saying about, we need to make a political step. Little steps will get us there. But are we at a point where we need a seismic shift? We need to take that big leap, Hugo, that you did across the line. Should we be doing more through sport?
It's a really good question. I think we should always explore where you can. I think making something a sort of a blanket policy or two thing maybe is a little bit hard. But it's just finding, Michelle, the opportunities to do it. I mean, nobody told us to sort of, we should start talking about north and south and stuff. It just kind of happened, and I think it's to be encouraged. But I think what you're saying is. The one point I would say is it's never been more important, and Trevor talks often about how the example of sport doing relationships properly on this island as opposed to the wrong way. And we're at an incredibly sensitive position now. Hopefully Brexit will go okay, but the north-south stuff is very, people are probably the relations have been as poor as they've been for a long time. And what you need is mutual respect and understanding. The one thing sport promotes is, and it's kind of funny, even from the political kind of point of view. And we were at a lecture last night in Leinster House where the great guy Ian Marshall, a unionist senator, brought together an awful lot of people, including a Professor Pete Sherlow from Liverpool. And he made the right point. He said, what's necessary in Northern Ireland now is collaboration. Is the mutual respect and understanding that never was actually completed from the Good Friday Agreement. And that's the answer. That's the prerequisite from everyone. Not only is it a good thing in itself, but it's a prerequisite, whether you're a nationalist who wants a united Ireland or whether you're a unionist who want to stay in part of the United Kingdom. The mutual respect of the both communities, the unfinished part, is a necessity to make it work. And I think sport gives a great example.
And one Ballymena councillor, he stood up and he said, Trevor, he said, is it not social engineering, he says, to get children to play sport together? And I looked at him and I said, is there anybody else in the room that thinks it's social engineering to get children to play sport together? And he looked around and he sat down. And so we need to have a proper foundation on where to go forward. And the foundation is there in the agreement. The only way to pursue your constitutional preference should be about making Northern Ireland or the north of Ireland work and promote good relations across the island. And no other method should be acceptable on this island. And anybody who tries to argue other things should be seriously challenged, because if we don't challenge that in the way that we properly should, we could end up blighting this island into the future. The last thing you want in a united Ireland is a social and economic basket case in Northern Ireland landing in your lap. And the last thing we want as being part of the United Kingdom is a country that is a social and economic basket case. So if you want a united Ireland, make the place work. If you want Northern Ireland to be in part of the United Kingdom, make the place work. And the beauty of sport is it gives great examples of how it can be done. So rugby can show it in an All-Ireland context, but many other sports. In the Olympics, we get more gold medals than anybody else in Northern Ireland, no harm to those from the Republic, because we are represented at the Olympics by both Ireland and GB and Northern Ireland. And so when my English niece boasted about how many gold medals Yorkshire got in the London Olympics, I was able to say, well, we actually got more than any of you over there. And she says, how come? And I said, well, we've got Katie Taylor as well. And that shut her up. And that's the beauty of sport. It can solve problems. So even you take England against Bulgaria and the racism that was there so evident, the fascism. And I was talking to a guy, Michael Boyd, who was I was talking to him yesterday morning, and he drove the campaign to drive racism and sectarianism out of Northern Ireland football. And the fans themselves bought into it and made a difference. And Michael actually said, I'm actually seeing a guy from Bulgaria who's involved in their football tomorrow. He says, I'll see if we can help him out. And because they actually showed that sectarianism can be challenged. So there's another good example through sport. And then never underestimate the importance of small gestures. So we talk about those young people, the Shankill bomb and retaliation for the Shankill bomb, the loyalist shot into a bar in grey steel, murdering people right across our society. But what happened as well was that letters went from people right across the community to both of those atrocities that were just saying this was not done in our name. And those were small gestures that make a difference. And one of the small gestures that helped in our situation was in the Euros, when unfortunately, tragically, a young Northern Ireland football fan was killed in an accident. But the Republic of Ireland fans, in their next match, actually had a minute's applause for the young fella. And it actually changed the nature of the relationship between two groups of fans, because it really resonated with them without actually being properly recognised by those that saw it. But the Northern Ireland fans got it and appreciated it, and at the end of it all, they were voted the best fans there. So that's a tribute to the people right across this island.
That's actually very pertinent, because I'm wondering, is part of the hope for the future our younger generation, and what can we do for them through sport? You've given examples of some of the things that you're doing in the north to get the communities and younger people involved. Maybe, Hugo, you want to think about that. If we're going to be inspiring the younger generations that weren't even born when the '95 World Cup was on, how do we do that through sport? How do we actually give hope for the future, for the good? We're here at the Good Summit. So, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of ways. I think in the mutual respect and just building relationships, and even a little thing that still has to be resolved for all the good stuff around rugby that we've talked about. We still have a situation where every start of the rugby season, people give out about Ireland's Call, which, for the people who don't know it, is the song that is used because the anthem of Ireland is the anthem of the Republic of Ireland, and the beauty of the Irish rugby team and some other sports is that we're the whole island. So it was inappropriate. It would be inappropriate for our Own Naveen to be the right anthem. And so it deliberately came up and brought up this shoulder to shoulder as a way of respecting the difference. And every start of every season, people giving out about this, and you're completely missing the point. They said, oh, it's a terrible song, missing the point that the two most successful countries in world rugby, South Africa and New Zealand, both actually adopted their own anthems to be inclusive. And Ireland's Call was, is a reflection whether you like the song or you don't like the song. Like we used to sit next to each other in the dressing room, and there was another guy on the left of us, Keith Crossan from Belfast, Trevor from Ballymena, me from Dublin. We were about to go out together to play for Ireland, and when they play the anthems, there's no anthem for those guys. So it's great, Ireland's Call, and people who give out about it miss the point completely. The beauty and the genius of the playing rugby on the whole island was even when the island divided, it meant the sport stayed together. So we got all the richness, the diversity, the difference that the Ulster, our northern teammates, brought. But still, you'll still the criticism. And I often say, God, if you have a problem with Ireland, for those people who are promoting a united Ireland, if you have trouble with Ireland's Call, wait till you get onto the really tough questions. So the hope that there's a lot of stuff still to be done, but it all comes back when you translate the sport into the stuff about Irish relations. It's all about mutual respect, understanding. Yeah.
We don't have all our sports playing at a.
And it's not necessarily. So let me make the point. That is not at all a criticism of sports that aren't played. And thanks, Michelle, for reminding me that. It just different sports had different histories and different patterns, and one is not better than the other. But my point was within the specific one of rugby, that did actually stay together. There was all these issues around the anthem.
Yeah, we had a problem in the first World Cup. You see that everybody else had an anthem and we didn't have one. When we travelled abroad in those days, we didn't play any anthem. And so the problem came because of the World Cup. And so we're standing in 1987 in wet and windy Wellington in New Zealand, and we're about to play against the Welsh team. We'd listened to their very powerful anthem come over the system, and the crowd singing it. And we're standing there wondering what we're going to get. And what we got, unbeknownst to us, we weren't even told, was a very bad recording by James Last of the Rose of Tralee. And I've always said, if you're going to lay your life down for a song, then the Rose of Tralee is not one of them. And Con Houlihan, who wrote for the Irish Independent at the time, he said, maybe for the next match they should play God Save the Rose of Tralee. So out of that, they went to Phil Coulter and asked him, could he come up with a song? And it's 4 proud provinces of Ireland standing shoulder to shoulder, and it works for me. And the one time that I sang all 3 songs, we played against England, it was God Save the Queen, which in theory is not their song either, but that's very technical. But was when Ireland played at Croke Park. And again, the symbolism of Croke Park and the symbolism of sport doing it again. The Gaelic sports, they used to have a ban on foreign games, and they had a ban on the security services. I had a good friend from sport and law, Seamus Leonard, at Queen's, because they had a good Gaelic team at the time, and he and I did law together, and we're still friends. And he always invited me to the All-Ireland final, and I'm from a police family, and I said, well, I'm not going until you get rid of the ban on the security forces. And so the day after they got rid of the ban, he rang me and he says, right, Trevor, what are you going to want to go to, hurling or football? And I said, football. And I also negotiated as much as I could drink when I was down there, and a lift down and a couple of meals, one down the way down and one on the way back. And I think Joe Brawley actually organised the tickets for us. Joe is a man who can unite the people of Ireland, and then within a week have lost 3/4 of them again.
Trinity grad.
I know. But Joe's a great guy and a friend as well. But they also then got rid of, when Lansdowne was being revamped, they opened up Croke Park to rugby, and England were playing at Croke Park, and and there was a lot of issues around it. I did about 20 odd interviews for various radio stations, and because they were trying to sort of stir it up, and I was trying to calm it down. And the line I took, rightly or wrongly, was in sporting terms, I said, when it comes to sport, I said, there's nobody unites the Irish more than when playing against the English, which was fine until one of my English brother-in-laws heard the interview. But I told him to dry his eyes. But it was fascinating just because we went to the game, and on the way up, I said to a Garda, where's there likely to be trouble? And he said there, so I went there to see whether there'd be trouble. And there was one guy standing there with about 50 plaques. Nobody else had turned up. And I think he was standing in a Celtic jersey. And he muttered something to me as I went past, and that was the extent of the protest. And so for the first time ever, I sang the Soldier's Song, I sang Ireland's Call, and I sang God Save the Queen. And if you're asking me what way forward in respect and tolerance between these islands, not just on this island, then rugby, sport and Gaelic showed a better way to do it.
Absolutely. And isn't it about that, not what shirt you're wearing or what country you're playing for, but the team that you're with, that sense of camaraderie and respect. You talk about mutual respect for each other as sports people. Isn't that really where the value is in sport?
I think you'd agree with me that teams of friends are the teams that succeed. Mm-hmm. And the best way to get the best out of a team is to get players to demand of themselves and then to demand of those around them. Mm-hmm. And in that way, you get those things working together. And then the concept of interdependence in a team also reflects into a society that people are all different, but you have to find a way to get them to work together so that the team does well. So you'd appreciate that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we have a few minutes. I know we've a small group and we're kind of in the spotlight here, but if anybody would like to ask a question of Trevor or Hugo. Yes, we have somebody, yeah. I'm going to throw you my mic. You ready? You can borrow that.
I wasn't a goalkeeper keeper, so I don't think I'll be able to catch it. Is that battery? Yeah, we have it. My name is Ken McHugh. I'm a cultural planner with Sport Against Racism, and I'll let you know the secret. You probably figured that these two guys here, along with Brian Kerr, who's the director of SARI, were the biggest inspiration for us here in this country to set up Sport Against Racism. Absolutely. My family, my father's a great admirer of Hugo because he refused to go to South Africa, and we were involved in the anti-apartheid movement ourselves. And Trevor, of course, the work he's done in North of Ireland. Just to say that the significant thing about Mandela as well, and he was also a great inspiration in his words, and Muhammad Ali, but the important thing with Mandela was not just about wearing the Springbok shirt, but the fact that he spoke Afrikaans to the team. And Frans Arpiner will say that, and that was the biggest impact, really, apart from the shirt. Suffice to say that it's a pity Amina had to go off so early because she undersold herself. Amina is actually a graduate of the Michael Johnson Youth Leadership Program in the United States. She's a very important person. The people I mentioned earlier on, and some of us not with us, but we're getting older. So the whole idea behind the SARI program was to nurture young people like Amina, who's really dynamic, but there's lots of them. Not alone did she graduate from here and go to now teaching in Nottingham. She also won the prestigious Beyond Sport Award with hijabs and hat tricks. And that was in the face of the Football Association of Ireland actually policing the FIFA ban that was dropped in 2014. They went out of their way to actually ban on the pitch football players like Amreen Singh, Karpreet Singh, for wearing turbans in their case. Incredible. The project she's working, the Football versus Discrimination Workshop, is not funded by the state. It's not recognised by the state. It's funded by UEFA Children's Foundation. We don't get a single penny from the state. These are all volunteers, those kids that are on our programme. And she comes from, look at her background. Our father is from Alexandria in Egypt, and our mother's from Kilbarrack. You know what I mean? Like a working class kid who goes to Trinity College. I don't know if she's on the top programme, but she should have been. But it made great strides, and she now is leading the organisation. We're retiring, and she's going to take it forward, and it's really important. It's great to have her on the same platform as the two guys, but I praise to the two of them. The work they've done is tremendous, and should be supported 100% by the state.
Very well said. Thank you. Anybody else like to ask a question or make a comment? Please don't be shy. Was that a question? Would you like to comment? Was that a question? Ask a question. Go on.
Okay. The reason why we set up hijabs and hat tricks was not just about getting young Muslim women to play football, but to actually engage them in society, because being involved in sport actually involved them in community as well, and that we have them engaged in all sorts of projects outside of football, outside of sport. And it's tremendous. And I used to feel the telephone calls from the father saying, I don't want my hijabi daughter to play football. And I was able to, because I studied theology in this very institution, so I knew the Quran inside out. And I said, where does it say that you can't play sport in the Quran? So it's not sport, it's all over the Quran. So we won our argument, and the biggest supporters for the girls playing football were the women, the mothers. The mothers were saying to us, the kids are playing sport, and before this, they used to go to their rooms, lock the door, wouldn't engage with the local community, and here they are now leading the local community. So sport is very important in that respect. It's not just for sport's sake, but for community's sake, for society's sake. Thanks.
One just on that point, and the great example, and Amina was a spectacular example, but we've seen great progress in women's sport and the recognition of women's sport, and even in our own sport, the success, the growth of women's rugby. And Trevor and I were at an Ireland Fund function a few years ago, and we were presenting an award to Niamh Briggs, who was the captain, and a lot of her teammates. And Niamh was talking about the World Cup, and she was kind of saying, well, when we went to the World Cup and when we beat the All Blacks and got into the semi-final of the World Cup, and I took the microphone from her because it was actually before the Irish team had beaten the All Black, the men's team. And we just said, ladies and gentlemen, you have heard an Irish captain, rugby captain, say something that no Irish rugby captain has said over the last 100+ years, when we beat the All Blacks and got to the semi-final of the World Cup. And only the first part of that is done, and the second part isn't done. We all hope that that might be done on this weekend. But it's just fantastic to see the development of that and other sports as well.
No, I think we have been focused on rugby and on the particular political situation in Ireland, but again, the benefits that flow out of sport in all sorts many ways. The work that's done by boxing with some of our young people to steer them away from various other activities which wouldn't be just as good. I'm involved in a wheelchair rugby team in Northern Ireland, the Ulster Barbarians, and we put together. Now, wheelchair rugby, for those that don't know, is played by the most disabled physically of our young people, and they can't play wheelchair basketball because they haven't got enough strength in their arms. And so I put together a team of former British Lions and Irish rugby players to actually take them on, and we've played them about 5 times, and we have been hammered every time, and it's full-on stuff. Now the wheelchairs are turned over. And Nigel Carr was sent off in one of the matches for being too aggressive. But it just creates, for those young people, the ability to compete even in the most physical of ways, despite the fact that they are quite often quadriplegic and have metal rods in their spines and other problems. And we totally get stuck into each other, and they actually beat us, and they genuinely beat us. We are genuinely trying to win, because they rub it in like any good competition afterwards and do so on a regular basis. But also, we look at the Special Olympics, we look at the Paralympics, we look at not only the young athletes and how they achieve in their particular sports and how sport is able to adapt to help them achieve, but we look at the other volunteers around that and the way they participate in the sport, and the Irish Special Olympics and the number of people who make that happen. And it's just, there's just so many different lessons can come out of sport, and it gives people here, I think, a chance to show their true character. Even I was involved in the World Rally Championship that was in Sligo and Fermanagh, cross-border, cross-community as well. But there are 3,000 volunteers went and took part in that. And there's one guy, and all he did the whole weekend was open a hotel door and close it. He didn't even see one rally car the whole weekend, and yet he just wanted to be part of that, and he just loved rallying. So where do we stop with the benefits of flow? And I'll finish, but it's also not sometimes appreciated by the political world, how much, for every pound you invest, how much you get back in that in all sorts of terms, because sport deals with health, it deals with justice issues, it deals with community issues, it deals with education. It's a Venn diagram. If you put a Venn diagram and you attach everything up that sport can actually tackle. In my policing board times, we introduced midnight soccer, and the levels of crime went down dramatically in the areas because you were taking the kids, tiring them out, and they all went to bed instead of running around the streets. And so it's just another example.
Very good. Obviously sport is in your heart, but it's really lovely to hear you articulate how sport could be the heart of everything else, really, because, there's so many things that we can do through sport, and sport can enable society to tackle really tough issues. Sport is good. There is a lot of good happening in sport. So one last comment before we wrap up, unless there's any burning questions out there. No, I don't think there's anyone jumping out. Yeah, we do. You would like to ask? Hold on, I'll give you the mic.
It's also the joy that the supporters get from watching rugby and watching any sports, and we have a momentous occasion coming up on Saturday at 11:15. I don't think anyone will be talking about Brexit, or no one will be talking about what's happening. And the joy that they'll see with a great captain going to lead us out, Rory Best, and hopefully not his third last game for Ireland. And I just say I love sports, and I think it's going to be a huge day. And just to bring a bit of fun into it, who do you think is going to win?
You robbed my question.
We certainly agree with you, and that's a great point about sport bringing together, and the whole country will stop. And look at just, for anyone who's watched the Rugby World Cup in Japan, look what the reaction of the Japanese people. They were worried, and I knew a lot of the people beforehand, were they going to be able to host a World Cup? Would they be able to have the grounds ready? Would they be able to compete? And one Japanese rugby guy said, will we be humiliated? It just couldn't be so different. And look at the joy, the extraordinary that's in it. I think it's a good chance. If we played 10 times, the All Blacks might win 6, but I think this Irish team is capable of beating them. And when you see Johnny Sexton saying this is the biggest game of my life, who's our best player, for people who don't know it, you know you're going to get a phenomenal performance. But you're right for highlighting also the sort of the joy it brings to everybody who watches. And we're great fans as well.
And who's going to win?
I think New Zealand will be favourites, but I definitely think Ireland can win. Definitely think they can.
Yeah, I have high hopes that this team, I think they're a year after their best, but I hope that they've got one more game in them. And well, one good game. To get through the semi-finals is a success for Ireland, and it would be brilliant to see a result. But since the World Cup is in Japan, can I tell you one story that shows the benefit, the ability of sport to overcome hatred and conflict? And it was a guy who played rugby for Ireland and the Lions, a guy called Harry McKibben. And Harry McKibben played at Queen's University, and then the war broke out, and Harry McKibben ended up in Dunkirk and managed to escape from Dunkirk, and having escaped from Dunkirk, then ended up in the Burmese jungle. And he was in the Burmese jungle fighting the Japanese, and as a consequence of that, he absolutely hated the Japanese because of that war. But after the end of all of that, after the war, he ended up in the International Rugby Board, and he ended up sitting at a meal beside a guy called Shigi Kono, who we met in 1985, who was the loveliest man, and we had the greatest time there and met the loveliest people. And after discussing with Shigi Kono, they talked about the conflict, and they worked out that during that conflict, they were actually about 100 meters apart in Burma, trying to kill each other. And that conflict had arisen that had put so many of our young people, as these conflicts often do, into positions where they end up fighting against each other. They sat at a meal together, and they then became very, very good friends. And it just shows to me the ability that sport and that other way of doing relationships, not only in Ireland but in the world, can actually undo the damage that's so often been done by conflict. And you look, I've had friends who've been out in Japan, they say that the reception of the people there has been absolutely fantastic. It was what we received in 1985. And we're all going to be supporting Japan in their next match, and we wish them well in that, and as well as Ireland.
And did you make the prediction who's going to win? Did you say we were going to win?
Yeah, well, I'll just say we're going to win, because there's no point being negative.
That's easier. We let him out, so. One last comment. What one good thing are we going to take from this conversation today, going forward?
I think you come back to the thing is this sort of respect, mutual understanding and respect brings fantastic sport, and it also can be translated, and nothing but good comes out of it.
Fantastic, thank you. Trevor?
No, I constantly say that after every conflict, what do? We end up rebuilding relationships and rebuilding societies. So we should try and avoid the conflict bit and just constantly work at building relationships and building societies in all the issues that are there.
Thank you very much. I hope you all thoroughly enjoyed that. I certainly did. And if you wouldn't mind, please showing your appreciation for Trevor and Hugo. Thank you. I think I have to do a little bit of housekeeping. The boss is over there looking at me. I just want to remind you all that this session is finished, but there is a special evening. Croy, would you like to? Yeah? Where's that on? Excellent. Well, hey, there you go. Thank you, Jules. So we'll see you all back here. Thank you very much.